In terms of the project exam, you as a project group, you are a team. You go to this exam together. So it's also important that you present yourselves as a team. So part of that is to, before you go up, it's a really good idea to talk about how you react in exam situations, because sometimes we react differently than we expect to do, but other times we have done this many times before, so we know how we react in these kind of situations. It's okay to, of course, be nervous. That is very, very common, but it's also okay to maybe share with your team if you are not the type that gets nervous, and you can maybe, be a reassuring guide for the others, that they can turn to you if they are really, really nervous, and that's a great way to calm each other down and set some expectations for the exam itself. And within that is also talking about your strengths and weaknesses. Is there one of you who has done this so many times before, or have you maybe not had that many oral exams, or have you maybe not tried doing this together as a team before? It's quite uncommon. Right. Some of you might have tried it before. So if that's the case, talk about your strengths and weaknesses and how it affects you in these kinds of examination situations. Another really important part about being a team is balance between each of your team members. So you should spend some time before the exam talking about, again, how you react in these kind of situations and how you assure that there is balance between you so that nobody speaks too much and nobody doesn't say enough. This is quite important because obviously sometimes your supervisor or your examiner at the exam itself will ask you to say more, or they will ask you a specific question if you haven't said enough. Sometimes they might also tell you to not answer questions so that your participants or your team members can say something instead. But this is not always the case, and you cannot rely on this strategy that the examiner or your supervisor will always break in. So you should, ahead of time, prepare yourself and practice the skill of letting other people speak, or if you know you're the type of person who might not say enough, practice taking the word and answering the questions. And one of the ways that you can practice this skill and also use it actively in the examination is simply just looking at each other and reaffirming each other. So I have always practiced this with my project groups, that whenever we have been asked a question, we sort of lean back and we look at each other. And it only takes 4 or 5 seconds to sort of reaffirm which of us are taking this question. And basically, it's just so that we can look at each other, we can make sure that everybody gets that room, and that we all agree that the next person to take this has actually wanted to take on this question, and nobody else really wants to get there. So yeah, again, it's just super easy to look at each other and reaffirm each other in that way. Another way to do this is also if you have an extra point to something that somebody has just said, is to support your team members. Say, you know what, that was a really, really great point, and I want to add on to that with so-and-so. This just shows that, again, you are appearing as a team, and it's not that you have to spend the whole session complimenting each other, because that is not necessarily academic content, and you want your exam to be full of academic content. But in this situation, or in this case, it's a good idea to really show that you are a team and thereby supporting each other. Another way of supporting and reaffirming is nodding along, active listening, smiling to your best of abilities, and trying to seem as confident, as comfortable in the situation as you can. I know that's not always possible, but that is why we practice these things, and that's why we talk about them prior to the actual examination. And I know it can seem a bit, what's really important here? Of course, your presentation and the academic content that you bring to the examination is the most important, but being a team and spending some time talking about being a team and how you do that to the best of your abilities is also a really important part of the project examination, and it shows that you are all in this together and that you have created this product together. next up, this is just from study.org, and this is to tell you what you are being asked to prepare for the examination. So it says, and I have it both in Danish and in English here. Yes, Tobias, you can get this PowerPoint afterwards. But yes, I have this both in Danish and in English here, and you can find this on study.org. This is, totally available to all of you. This is not some kind of, and should hopefully not be too surprising. But it just says that the starting point for the oral examination is the project report and any supplementary material. The exam includes individual presentations within one of the selected topics by the examiner, which will be communicated to the students no later than 3 working days prior to the exam. Each individual presentation may last up to 5 minutes. A dialogue between the students and the assessor about the project will be conducted after the individual presentations. So basically, what this means is that ahead of the examination, you will be given a topic or a question for each of you guys in the project group, and that is what you should center your presentation around. Then there will be a dialogue between the students and the assessor for the project, and that will be after, or it usually will be after the individual presentations. So this is what you should center your presentation about. This is what you have to prepare ahead of time. Just to be totally clear, the subjects are sent to you by your supervisor and examiner, so they will be communicated to you no later than 3 working days prior to the exam. That is what you should base your presentation around. Questions or topics sent to you, that is where you have to put your starting point. So with that in mind, I have a little keyword that I always like to start with in terms of the project exam presentations, and that is reflections. So this is just to put you into the right mind. Obviously, you need to center your presentation around the topic that you are given, but just as a way to start off a brainstorm, use reflections. So what I mean by that is to go back and look at every part of your project, sort of set them up here with the problem area, the methods, the theory, analysis, operationalization of theory, the results, and also how you can situate your project in a broader context. A great way to start off thinking about your presentation is to every step of the way. Right. So your presentation. This is just a little tip or a few tips on how to brainstorm and structure your presentation. So a great way to start is just to brainstorm and coordinate with your group, because even though these are individual presentations, you still are a group. This is still a group exam. You are still a team, even though you will be judged individually, of course, but you still have to be a team when it comes to your project. So you have to coordinate with your group, and it's a great time to brainstorm and then start there. So basically what I usually do is I take a point of departure in the project. Again, this is very, very important. Your exam should be about your project, so this is where you start. And basically what I usually do is I go back and I reflect on every single process that we have done, every single choice that we have made, because I remember on my first 3 projects, I thought, we didn't really choose anything, we just did it. But you always make a choice. And along the way, I always write them down as I go now, because I've learned that. But since this is your first project, just go back and reflect on all the choices you have made throughout your project, and then relate them to the topic that you've been given for your presentation. So basically, a way that you can structure, this is not the only way that you can structure your presentation, but a good way to do it is to shortly introduce the topic, what you wrote about the topic in the project, and then your further reflections. And those reflections come from the brainstorm that you've had together with your group. And then you can try and go beyond the project. What is missing? What would it look like if we had taken a different path, if we had made a different choice? Is there a different or a new approach or a new aspect that we can add? onto this. And again, this is not to say that you have to bring stacks of journals that say something interesting that could also have happened. This is more your own reflections and things that you think could have been interesting if we had used a different method, if we had taken a different choice of data, if we had done something differently. How could that have affected the project, and why did we choose not to do that, and could we have done that differently? Those kind of questions that you want to ask yourself. And this is how you can also situate your project, by asking yourself these kinds of questions and also looking at what is our project sort of contributing with. Obviously, this is your first project, so this is not where you make any groundbreaking discoveries, but it is a good idea to look into, why this issue, why did we look at this, and what does that mean for our project, and could we maybe, if we were to continue with this project and with this problem area and with this question, how would that look? Right. So these are some tips for the presentation in terms of the examination itself. So basically, it is very, very important that you use academic language, you use the theoretical concepts, and not everyday language. And basically, this shows that you have a grasp of the academic field, also that this is an academic discussion and conversation that you are having with the examiner and your supervisor. This is not everyday conversation. So it's important that you show that you have a grasp of the concepts, the theories, and the methods that you use by using the academic language as well. And within that is also that what you have to present is academic content. So there is no reason to making a lot of arguments that are not based in some kind of theory or concept or methodology that is academic in its essence. So really discussing anything that is too outside your project, that doesn't have the academic content of your project, or that isn't founded in anything that you've been taught through your classes, is not really super relevant for this particular examination. So you have to use academic language, you have to present the academic content of your project, and you have to use academic argumentation in the discussion. And basically this means that while you might be very, very passionate about your project, which is great, it's also totally okay to be very, very proud of your project because you have worked very, very hard on it. It has to be an academic discussion. So you have to avoid any personal opinions that or you might have coming up throughout the examination. I know sometimes when somebody is critical of your work, it can feel like a personal attack. It's never a personal attack. Your examiner and your supervisor will always only talk about the academic content of your project and of what you are presenting to them. So always avoid any sort of personal feelings or argumentations or opinions, especially if you have, this is very common, you've written a project about something you're very passionate about. I usually write projects about Irish travelers because I'm very, very passionate about that subject. And when you do that, like me, you have to avoid your personal feelings and also you only focus on the academic content that you have found throughout your research or your project. So that's super important. Right. And then you should assess your project's weaknesses and strengths critically, but without taking it down. So assessing something critically, academically critically, is always going back to the reflections that we talked about. So when you are academically critical, you're not just saying that your project sucks and you should have done all this differently and it was never any good and you just did a totally bad job. That won't really get you anywhere. It's not really what your examiner and your supervisor is looking to hear. We are looking to hear your academic assessment and your critical reflections. So it's fine to say, what, our choice of methods, if we have done this different, have obtained a different result that we would be, that we think is more in line with the theory that we used and the outcome that we wanted, or we think that if we had maybe formulated our research question differently, it would have fit the project better and our overall goal and these kind of things. Those are totally fine academic reflections. But saying that your research question was stupid or it just didn't work is not a critical reflection. So again, the key word I always use for myself is just reflection. I reflect upon everything I do, and I reflect in an academic language for my academic discussion of my academic content. I think that is one of the best ways to frame it. So yeah, and just some questions you can ask yourselves again. What could you have done differently in order to improve your project? Again, goes back to the critical reflections. Which methods, theories, literature could you also have applied instead? What could have been different? Again, critical reflections. And then try to go deeper into these reflections by the choices you've made throughout the project, because as I said, it might not feel like you made a choice, but you definitely did make a choice. And these choices are relevant because they do show why your project shaped itself in the way that it did. Some of you might have had the experience that you started out somewhere completely different with your project, and then it took a turn, and now you're different than what you started out with, and that is totally fine. But you need to reflect upon that process and why you made those choices and why you made it to where you are now with the project. And then obviously also maybe ask yourself, why is your project relevant? Why should we know, what you've come to know throughout your project? Why is it an issue, what you've asked or what you've chosen to look into? Why is it a problem? Why is it an issue? What is it that is interesting about your project? Is also something that you can reflect upon. It's not that you always necessarily come up with, issue in the world, but it is important that you reflect upon this and that you reflect upon why your project could be important, or if it situates itself with a trend that is also very interesting. I like to use the word interesting in terms of my project, not necessarily because it's super important for the rest of the world, but it's interesting and it shows something that could be interesting to look into further and so forth. Right. So lastly, I have a few pieces of other general advice. So read your presentation out loud to yourself beforehand. And I know that this can be exceedingly boring to do. I used to always find these kind of things boring, but a small tip in theater, and what I used to make them do, is to read out their lines, or in this case, a presentation, in different silly voices, or really, really fast, or really, really slowly, because it does take some of the banality or the sort of boring feeling out of reading your own presentation. Obviously, you should think your project is exciting and that what you have to say, your presentation, is really, really interesting and important to the discussion. It gets boring when you've also written it. And that is why reading it super fast, super slow, or in a very, very deep voice, or in a very, very high voice can contribute to actually you memorizing it better. It does trick your brain quicker and remembering it better, and it just makes it a little bit more fun. So that is what I recommend. And then also practice being nervous so you can get some of the nerves out of the way. I know it sounds silly, especially because it's a couple feeling, but by practicing your presentation and also getting that feeling of knots in your stomach, or maybe getting a bit shaky or nervous, is a way to get those nerves out of the way and really feel confident in that situation. And if you're extra bold, being nervous can actually also help you, because being nervous is an energy that you can stretch. And then, so that is just, a little trick and technique. If you're really good at it, you can sort of practice being nervous and then turning that into confidence. But also know that it's totally normal to be nervous, and it's totally acceptable to be nervous. And these are what your project is about. And in terms of that,